people coming through just to be entertained. And that lets you know that even in the midst of segregation, you know, people still needed lighter moments. And I would say that was one great amenity that drew people from these rural outlying areas, from the rural centers into city centers like this community, and no doubt shaped the history and culture of this place. So that's a good thing.
And no doubt, one of the things I was curious about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this as well, is we know that, and definitely we'll open up to the audience as well, but there has definitely been a move to kind of try to bring the spirit back. Definitely that's something we do here at the Hayti Heritage Center, and there are some people that are even part of that legacy that have left and are still being honored to this day, because I was definitely friends with Baba Chuck Davis, who was definitely a major influence in the African-American dance community and African dance and all along those lines, and even friends with Phil Freelon, who was definitely involved in the notion of what he created, including the North Star Church of the Arts, which is a smaller center similar to Hayti and all along those lines. But I just wondered if you could talk to a little bit about the continuing development, because I think that there is still some development where people are trying to maintain the legacy, maintain the history. I know that we do talks here that I sometimes coordinate, you do some, I do some with our whistle stop tours and a number of other things. But there are people like even our current mayor that are involved in trying to build back some of this community. But I was wondering your thoughts around that, and just your thoughts around the importance of history and the legacy that some people are still maintaining to this day. Because I think about Desan, I think about folks like Kim Register and a number of others that are maintaining, even Q, our own program director here, that are maintaining this legacy and everything. But I wondered if you could talk to that.
Yeah. I can tell you this, over the course of probably the next 5 years, you're going to see a proper level of development sort of taking place in this neighborhood. Probably not been seen probably since those early 1880s with some of that growth and development. I got to serve on a committee appointed by the mayor to sort of assess and look back over some of this history, along with lots of other community persons. And it was amazing to see that, you know, when I use the very important terms, memory, right, and how people remember. And sometimes I have to remind folk that individual memory is a unique kind of thing. But then you merge that individual memory with a community memory, and you end up with some different conversations, right? And that's important to kind of keep in mind. And so there are a process going on right now to kind of still interview people. There have been lots of interviews that have occurred from people throughout the community. I know Duke University also had a great significant program getting out there, talking to the people, trying to capture, you know, their vivid experiences of having lived in this community. And that's a very important thing. But along with that, I'm pleased to note as well, one of the most important things that came out of these conversations with the city of Durham and the past mayor, O'Neill, and the current mayor, Leo Williams, is that we finally about to get a sign that says Hayti. And we say, well, how can you be like the oldest neighborhood here, and one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city, and not even have a community sign to welcome people to the city? We own the threshold. They're about to start looking at the question of urban renewal. We know its impact, right, on this neighborhood. And so 147, the freeway that many of y'all came in on, so they starting conversations now to kind of address and take a look at what ways, you know, can they even bring about even more change, right? And all about you'll note also coming down Fayetteville Street, where it used to be the Fayetteville Street public housing area, right? Well, even there, growth and development, there's a gentleman out of Raleigh, Mr. James Montague, who has a project soon to kick off right down the street, which will, in essence, bring in about 500 to 600 units, and of those, maybe about 30 affordable housing, affordable pieces sort of built in there. And that will sort of change the shape and direction. This area has certainly been impacted by gentrification, 100%, 1,000%, I would say. And so the community is sort of doing what it can do to sort of preserve its history, to preserve its past. And that's important because, you know, again, you don't want a history sort of wiped away and sort of as every new group comes along, they kind of shape and change that history. And so anyway, I hope before y'all leave for lunch, the wonderful PowerPoint presentation prepared for y'all. So I hope y'all at least get a chance to see the slides from it. That's what I do. And so because it'll help paint a picture for you of where the community has been, but also where it is seeking to go. And one thing we know that they are determined to do is they're determined to make sure that the history and culture of this community is preserved, and a place like this serves as a great anchor for helping to make sure that happened. There's some great photos. I did bring out copies of photos, rather. You'll get a chance to sort of see out there. It sort of gives you a look at the neighborhood. But also understand, over the course of the next 5 years, lots of change coming all across the street, direct across the street, in development. So.
Andre, before we get open, maybe open to one or two questions, everything, I cannot hesitate without mentioning one other thing that is part of the history as well. So we talked about the arts, we talked about, to some degree, the political things that were going on and the building of the Black Wall Street. But, you know, we're in the middle of a sports season, because definitely a lot of people are paying attention to basketball and all along those lines, and there's all these arch rivalries that are taking place, and a lot of times people forget, and I know that you've written about it, the secret game that was actually between the Duke team, actually it was the Doctors, let's be fair and everything, against North Carolina Central, and Central did win that game and everything. So we got to talk about that a little bit, and there was definitely some sports that was included, including the Algonquin Club, which my dad was a member of. He was also a member of the Malcolm X School and all along those lines, and as he liked to tell it, because he sent me an article that was him playing against Arthur Ashe when they were both youngsters. He did say that Arthur Ashe beat him, but he did admit that at least he won a couple of games. So he thought he did well because he won a couple of games against the great Arthur Ashe. So if you're like a teenager and you're able to get 3 or 4 games against Arthur Ashe, I think you've done well. So he definitely did that. But I just wanted you to talk a little bit about the sports connection as well, because definitely sports has played a significant role in the Black Wall Street, and like I said, the Algonquin Club was a major part of that. The Durham Striders was a major part of that, and of course that secret game that took place between Duke and North Carolina Central University.
Right, very, very important. This is the anniversary year, by the way. Dates back to going back to 1944. This secret game, and I know I spoke with athletics at Duke, and our university folk are working on a little mini program, and to sort of take a look at that secret game was first game that came into consciousness done in 1944, but didn't come into consciousness until 1991. For those of you all who are too young to know who Ted Koppel was, Ted Koppel had a night show, right? And so he, on that show, 1991, he kind of sprung out this game. And everybody was like, what are you talking about? What game are you talking about? A secret game, like played between NCCU and on the medical staff at Duke University, who was being trained during World War II? You know, what was that all about? And ends up a wonderful hidden story that had been hidden for years, that there were a few folk who survived, Mr. Aubrey Stanley, and some of the counterparts at Duke as well, Mr. Pee Wee Boyd, who I knew, and Coach John McClendon. And so Johnny Mac, as everybody called him, John B. McClendon, for whom our gymnasium is named, the McDougal-McClendon Gymnasium, who was a powerhouse in basketball, quite nationally known. Helped to build the reputation of our institution through athletics, and I'll say that to anybody. But that secret game was an important point that was missed. And so how you keep a secret so quiet for over 50-some years is amazing to me, especially in Durham. But that's exactly what happened. But also down the street, we were lucky to have the Algonquin Tennis Club. Again, historical marker. So I was there that day, had a little exhibit set up out there. And the Algonquin Tennis Club dates back to 1920s. The irony is, we have not, the American Tennis Association, National Tennis Association, every association has contacted everybody and trying to find one photo of that building. So that's one of the hidden treasures. So I'm telling all you archivists and librarians out there, if you ever come across a picture of the Algonquin, we have pictures of inside, plenty of pictures of inside. But the Algonquin Tennis Club was Durham's way of showing its cultural self through athletics. And so it was at first it was a private club. And then I just found the records a few days ago where they changed and sort of dissolved themselves, and then created much more different and nuanced kind of place where people could, when guests could come, they needed somewhere to stay, because we did have the Biltmore Hotel here. By the way, for those who are unaware, we had the Jones Hotel downtown on Rigsby. But when guests, and important guests, as they would like to say, would come to visit, they would stay there. And so Miss Newby, she was in charge of making sure that every experience that you had was a wonderful experience. But she was aided by a woman, a wonderful woman named Miss Bess Whitted. Anyone here ever heard of Miss Bess Whitted? Well, John, all right. All right, of course John would know. Well, Miss Bess Whitted, she was a cashier, by the way, at North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company. And it's told that through her hands, through North Carolina Mutual, because they were not just insurance, they also, for those who may not be aware, had a real estate conglomerate they had built up, land holding they had built up. And so all that money had to flow through her hands. And so $1 million, as the story goes, per year passed through her hands. as a cashier at North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company. And so Miss Bess Whitted, though, on the side, always made sure that there was what they call, and she lived right beside the Algonquin Tennis Club, that there was this wholesomeness for the young folk in the community, whether you were middle class black folk or working class who live right there. Let me clear this up for those who might not be aware. Remember, highly segregated, still segregated, until the laws came down, laws and walls came down. And so you had a mixture of, say, the much more influential, well-known on the main streets of Fayetteville Street, but directly behind them in other areas, you had the working class folk who worked in the tobacco factories and had their own businesses, and so their children, too, had a place to go to learn the game of athletics, but also how to get along with others. So I know I'm talking on.
No problem. And let's be clear, because there is a very popular style of sports, some that like it, some that don't, but it's my understanding that McClendon had something to do with that. So if you're a follower of basketball, you know what the fast break is, and you definitely know what the four corners is. Right. And some people don't like the four corners because it's a stall tactic, but definitely Mr. McClendon had a hand in both of those strategies and all along those lines. Just really quickly, and then like I said, I'm definitely going to turn it over to the audience. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of the social work that was going on, and particularly political activism? Because one thing that I did not mention is that I had the pleasure of going to Marquette University, and the reason I got to Marquette University was because of somebody that was connected to here that was also connected to education. So if y'all are studies of history, a study of education, you probably heard the name Howard Fuller, and Howard Fuller was how I got to Marquette, because he was running a program called EOP, which was folks that were either from rural areas or from disadvantaged communities and all along those lines. So I had the pleasure of actually getting to that prestigious university through that connection to Durham and the Malcolm X School, as well as other things that Howard was involved in. But could you talk a little bit about that political activism?
Sure. One thing I will tell you is this, that, many would assume that, because on one of the slides I have up, it notes that, what did African-Americans, what decisions did African-Americans and could African-Americans make during the period of Jim Crow and segregation, right? They could have used mobility. They could have left and migrated away. They could have went out and established their own institutions, like we're going to see. And some lived within the confines of segregation. And others went on and created their own institutions, even in the midst of segregation, right? And so Durham is a perfect model to kind of understand that, people did not just merely acquiesce and go along with segregation, though. There were always challenges to segregation, and a lot of people like cleared up. And although there are still some though who are quite romantic about romanticize, what segregation is all about. Some say I want to go back to that period. I was like, yeah, well, you might want to go to some parts of it. I don't think you want to go back to all of it. And so you'll find here that starting as early as 1933, my great uncle graduated from North Carolina College for Negroes, right? Became a physics professor, by the way, and one of his classmates was Thomas Holcutt. Everybody here better know who Thomas Holcutt is. Do y'all know who Thomas Holcutt is? Thomas Holcutt, graduate of North Carolina University, sought to gain admittance in 1933 to UNC Chapel Hill and to go into pharmacy because the founder of our institution, Dr. James E. Shepard, was only the second African-American, dating back to 1894, second African-American pharmacist in the entire state of North Carolina, by the way, right? And so he wanted to get into school. But he also had good legal help, seeking to gain this admittance through Conrad Pearson, for whom this is his family's church. There's a Pearson stained glass window here as well. And they were really seeking to kind of challenge the very foundations of segregation as they existed. They were using the prism of education in higher education as a method and way to sort of do so. And so Holcutt was not successful, but it was a reminder to others to challenge that. Paulie Murray would later come on, challenge that very institution and system as well. Our founder played a little interesting role, but he used it, as I shall say, for the development of our university. There were no graduate programs here. So I want you all to know that in which African Americans could seek out a master's degree or a doctorate degree or a professional degree. So although you still had Shaw University, I think was closing out some of his professionals, like his medical program, his School of Law, was kind of closing out. So there arose this idea that, hey, we have, those who are desirous of a full education and full rights and full freedoms, right? And that included education. And so in the end, though Holcutt was not successful because our founder failed to send over the transcript to UNC Chapel Hill, But meanwhile, he was having conversations with the governor, the governors of the state, and saying, hey, we need a graduate program here, a master's program. So they had a program called Grant and Aid, where black folk had to go away and get a graduate degree, and the state of North Carolina would rather pay you to go away to out of state than to attend an institution. Until the 1950s, and folk here in Durham started to sort of challenge that, right? But later, you had the Durham Committee on Affairs of Black People Forum. I was at their annual meeting just last night in the New St. Joseph's, by the way, where Mayor Williams laid out some conversations. And so that became a very important and pivotal group, not just in Durham, but also in the South, in the entire United States of America. I was lucky to be executive director of that organization once, also head of the PAC. That means I raised a lot of money. As you can see, I like raising money. And so the Durham Committee became a very pivotal and powerful force in shaping the politics from 1935 to the present, and next year we'll be 90 years old. And so anyway, that gives you a flavor of understanding that people did not just accept being segregated, right? Yeah, some benefited from it. If you own a business and you catered, black folk catered directly, yeah, you appreciated that. But there were those who were not silent about the conditions in which they lived, and that's just an important thing. Just want to make sure we kind of clear up there.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Definitely open it up to questions if anybody has any, and then I know y'all got breakout rooms very shortly and all along those lines, but definitely one thing I was going to mention, even to your point and everything, is that I mentioned my grandmother, Molly Houston Lee, was a very pivotal part of that whole librarian conversation and definitely did a lot of work in that field. She was actually one of those folks that actually got her degree at a very young age during that time of segregation and actually got it from Columbia University. So if you go look up Wikipedia, you'll see both her name as well as my mother, who was very much involved in the foundation world and everything. So if y'all got any money ever from the Golden Leaf Foundation, Valeria Lee is my mother and all along those lines. So definitely she's been involved in this space as well. But any questions that folks have got and everything that folks may want to ask based on our conversation so far? And I know y'all are going to go to breakouts very shortly.
Yeah, and while that question is coming, obviously, go ahead. No, it was just one quick point about when we think about, I didn't want folks to be unaware that, of course, North Carolina College for Negroes, which later became North Carolina State University, right down the road, considered a later part of the Hayti community. The boundary lines existed when you got along Enterprise Street. 1902, the city annexed this part in and brought it into it. Still didn't provide any sidewalks, still didn't provide any lights until one of our graduates, who's right here in Old 10 City, is directly behind here, Mr. Lewis Austin. And I couldn't talk about, let me finish, I'm gonna take your point. Lewis Austin, one of the most significant figure and shaper of not just this city, but this region, through his newspaper, the Carolina Times. And you can go online and read those great stories in the Carolina Times, his editorial, because, again, much of the success that occurred as a result of him, and we're this close to the Carolina Times building, which is right behind here. So please go make sure you take a photo of it, you know what I mean? But yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Good.
Can I take just 1 minute? Because I just wanted to make a notion of even how, even though it's Raleigh and not Durham, but the two are very closely related, as Andre Van just said. And I can tell you from my own understanding of the history, even though she was in Durham and even though her husband, my grandfather, was the person that the biology building is named after over at North Carolina Central University, Grandma Molly actually saw that there was a need for an African-American library in Raleigh. So she literally went knocking on the doors literally in Raleigh during that hard times of the Depression to raise money by going door to door. So as you can imagine, a small, petite woman, because she's not big in stature or anything along those lines, literally going and asking folks to raise this money for that library that still exists to this day. So if you go to Raleigh, any of y'all that are from state, and you go to the Richard B. Harrison Library, you can actually see that there is a Molly Houston Lee collection and all in that space. And some of those are books that she had that was donated to that library. Dad still has some of those books, and I have one or two of them as well. But definitely your comments as well.
Yeah, the Stanford Warren Branch Library came out of the Durham Colored Library. Came out of about 1912, 1913, Dr. Avery McDuffie Moore, the first African-American doctor, by the way, in this community, whose home was near, very, very near here. If you go look out there at the photos, there's a big, huge house, and that his house is there because sometimes before the hospital was really developed, that he had sometimes operate out there, by the way. So, but he donated his entire library through his church. At first, it started out in the White Rock Baptist Church, where he was a big member and Sunday school guy. And when people got kind of clannish about going into somebody else's church, he said, okay, we got to do something with that. And so it's a great example of what people, those African-American men who had saw those who had wealth, and what do you do with wealth? That as you acquire it, you learn to share it. And so they created Durham Colored Library Association, created their own separate systems, because remember, segregation was, again, high in force. And so as a result of that, that library grew and developed, became a very community-centered space. Dr. Stanford A. Warren, by the way, who was a local physician, I'll just say very close to the Duke family, was quite wealthy. And he too, 1940, right before he died, sort of endowed and offered funds for the Stanford A. Warren Branch Library. So from there came the impetus to establish in other rural areas. There was this desire all throughout the county to be able to, increase literacy, but also keep students up and informed. And so there's a wonderful photograph I have on display out there. Miss Annie, Lord, I'm trying to remember her last name. It'll come to me. Y'all, that'll happen sometime. It'll come to me in a second. But you can see her out there with this big, beautiful bus, and all these young kids. This is in the rural area, out there just picking and priming books out, right, where they would go out. And that told you that people were hungry for literacy. They were hungry for education. But then getting to Bragtown, by the way, you'll note that the community interest grew out there as well, right, because there was a very intact neighborhood and community. And so one of my mentors ended up being the first librarian there, who was Elijah John Pookie Fisher, right? Who was his father was the pastor of White Rock Baptist Church. He later, Mr. Fish also became not just the first librarian there, but he was very community-centered. He knew everybody, right? And which suited him well because he became a mortician a little bit after that. And Fisher's funeral parlor, which is still here today, is as a result of that. So.
And Andre, along those same kind of lines and everything, it is my understanding that some of the family members, particularly of the Durham Colored Library, are actually working on building a monument to that, because I think that Ms. Spalding and others are involved with that, and they're trying to get that up and running. I think they've already got the building and everything, if I'm understanding correctly. So that's something that is going on from a historical perspective, and they've been working on that now for a few years, and I think that they're closer to fruition than they were expecting, so hopefully that'll be coming out, that people will be able to visit that on a regular basis. Any other questions? And like I said, I know that at 11 o'clock y'all got the breakout session and everything, so any other questions? Come on, y'all are librarians, supposed to be having tons of questions.
Well, I'll say this. Make sure you take a look at just a few of the photos we've kind of gleaned and kind of pulled together to give you a history. Then we're also going to find a way for you to see this presentation that I worked on for almost 2 damn days, that you aren't getting a chance to see, which I'm not understanding. But anyway, but again, I will say this as we kind of close out, and then I think John had a point, yes. that a few years ago I was asked to kind of assess, well, how many businesses survived after urban renewal? How many are still among us? And relatives maybe about 20 that survived after urban renewal. And of that 20, 2 just closed. North Carolina Mutual, right, after a 120-year run, closes, right? Secondly, we had Space Auto Service that has, since 1938, offered most of the service in this neighborhood for an African-American community, had a beautiful service station, and had moved further down Fairview Street after urban renewal, and they just closed just a few years ago. And so for those of us, who knew these people, knew the founders and knew the families, it's kind of hard to understand. Like, how could you come from all that progress, and yet, one by one, sometimes these businesses that they form that survived all these years just kind of go away. So anyway, that's just a unique point. But John,
Yeah. Right.
Glad you asked that. Glad you asked that. Right. So there are lots of women personalities that have kind of helped shape. Right. And let me deal with one quick question: what we call the world of work. Right. That's a term I like to use. World of work. Right. Because that gives a look at the variety of jobs that women held, whether they were teachers. Although when you got married at a certain time, you unfortunately were required. You couldn't work in the public school, which is ironic, right? And then, but one stands out, Miss Clyde Quinn Scarborough, right? Very unique, interesting woman. And many folk in the city, many businesses owe a debt to her. You know why? Because she helped to found the Daisy Hargett Scarborough Nursery, which was a very important structure. It was the earliest, for those who are unaware, it was the first sort of like child development center, white or black, in the whole state of North Carolina. But many do not know, right? And his name, her husband, Mr. J.C. Scarborough, was, if you go down Fairville Street, there's a beautiful Scarborough mansion. This was their church also, by the way. But Miss Clyde, who was trained at Talladega in Alabama, came here, taught early on at Hillside High School, and then ends up marrying Mr. Scarborough, ended up in a world where you're living in a mansion, right? And so she said, well, what do you do at that time? What do you do? And so she went out and helped to create, that's named, by the way, for her husband, former wife, by the way, the Daisy Hargett Scarborough Nursery. And that nursery was important because that nursery allowed women to have the ability to leave the home and go work, right? And so when they looked back, and I know the family, by the way, when they looked back, they had assessed that she allowed almost 5,000 mothers to sort of have the ability to go into a world of work and knowing that they had a safe place for their child. So Miss Clyde is one who deserves an award on top of award because no one talks about her. But yet she was so very important to the economic stability, of African-American families and women as well. But also the early rudiments of allowing young folk to have a chance to get an early education. This gallery out there, Miss Lida Merritt, for those who are unaware, Lida Moore Merritt. We used to have a portrait hanging up out there, but a very important figure. Though raised quite privileged. Let me just clear this up. Privileged, even by Southern standard, privileged, right? Coming from the daughter of Dr. Moore, but married into the Merritt family. And the question was, well, what did you do with that privilege, right? Well, she took that privilege, and for those unaware, the only one in the world is the magazine for the blind. In other words, she noticed that those who were visually impaired didn't have access to good reading material. And so Miss Lida Merritt set out and to solve that problem by taking lots of stories that she would read in all the newspapers like Ebony and Magazine, Ebony and Jet and all when they came along. And she would take these stories and have someone to transfer them over to Braille. And then they would supply them not only in Stafford at Warren Branch Library, by the way, but in other places and sent out all throughout the world. And so she enjoys also a very strong reputation for understanding that there was a need that was unmet by those who were visually impaired, right? And who was concerned about that? Not many were concerned about that, let's be honest. But she took that wealth, because she didn't work now. She didn't work. Her husband was the vice president and the son of the founder of North Carolina Mutual. So they had a little bit more wealth than most folk would have, by the way, and including houses. And so that right beside here, well, further down, about where Stanford Library is, there were 2 or 3 houses they owned. So they rented them out. They took the income from that rent to put into that magazine. And so that's important. Those are 2 examples that stand out for me right now.
Just really quickly, could you also talk about, because I know that there used to be a very popular club here in Durham that was actually held at a beauty school that was also one of those that was women run and everything. So I was wondering if you could talk about the DeShazos Institute and what that was all about, because that was actually where the old Talk of the Town used to be, and I think it's another club right now and everything. But that was very much a institution that was a lot of women were getting trained in the beauty field in that particular place, and that was right in the midst of the heart of Durham, what is the heart of Durham now. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Another person, and that's a very interesting area that is people are researching right now about those who are in beauty culture, as we might call it. The folk here in the South, we call them beauty parlors, right? Those, my friends on the West Coast call it salons, beauty salons. So yeah, Madame DeShazer, right, was very important and prominent. And again, we're talking about creating opportunities for African-American women to be their own bosses. And many of them studied at her school. She and all her sisters came down. Some came down from New York. They established this beauty college, right, that focused on helping African-American women to learn and gain their own skill sets, to get trained there. And they went out. And I think as the story goes, she created almost like 3,000 women over the course and period of time, went out, learned, trained there at the beauty college, went out and established their own businesses. And so that, I think, speaks to, you know, this idea of understanding that, you know, that people had to learn to be creative. And that important field of looking at those who are beauty culture, that's an important point. But that's something that gets left out. There's someone, and I know we got to close, but there's one important facet that many people overlook in beauty parlors. The beauty parlors are one of the most important places. I have relatives who own beauty parlors back home, as we say. And if you want to know what's going on, you better be in that beauty parlor, right? And so my cousin, she was known very prominent in the NAACP. And so, too, it happened here in Durham as well, that while women were sitting there and getting their hair done up and all that other good stuff, but they were also receiving information about what was going on in their neighborhood and community. Membership drives were taking place there. And that is that overlooked part of history that many people don't pay attention to. But those beauty culturalists, they shaped what was going on in that neighborhood by providing important information about what was going on there. And so I would tell you, do not overlook any beauty parlor in your research because they're very important.
And you'll be glad to know as we're wrapping up, the slides have been working, so we did have the slides going on in the background. And it's my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that right now, you talked about 20. I think that there are really only 3 that are still existing. Scarborough still exists. It was part of the Black Wall Street St. Joseph Historic Foundation, which is now the Hayti Heritage Center, and White Rock. That is pretty much the extent of it. I mean, some people may give Mount Vernon and Union some credit as well, some of our other churches, but in terms of the keystone properties, I would say that those are the 3 that are remaining. So you can definitely see that there has been a significant decline, but like I said, there are a lot of people that are trying to rebuild and they're trying to bring new life to this area, to this historical area, both the work that we're doing here at the Hayti Heritage Center as well as the work that others are doing, including our current mayor and a number of other folks. I go to the Black August in the park on a regular basis, and there are other folks that are trying to rebuild this community. So definitely keep your eyes open, and I know that one of the works that we need on a regular basis is the documentation, because that's something that unfortunately is not done enough of. So I'm glad to see that many of y'all are interested in the archivist field and are interested in doing this kind of work, because I can tell you that that is something that is missing on a regular basis. It's something that we even talk about here, is the need to document what is going on so that when we're gone, it can still be documented and known about. So I appreciate that y'all are all going into this work. And I think that y'all are now getting ready to go out into y'all's breakout spaces and all along those lines. But I'm going to turn it over to lovely Lisa, because she's definitely, hopefully that you enjoyed our presentation. But I was glad that I was able to provide some insights, and I hope that y'all enjoyed it. So, like Q said, I'm Mark Lee, a member of the staff, my good friend Andre Van.
Thank you. I will never not be amazed at Mr. Van's ability to recall and retain so much history and so much knowledge. It's amazing. For those of you who have never seen him speak before, he always does this, and he just has it, and he can bring it up, and he's got so many interesting stories. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Lee, for your time. And we really appreciated the connection to libraries and archives, so thank you to your family as well. So we have an updated slide about break rooms. We have already had one question about whether we will be sharing these slides. I'll talk with our presenters to see if they're okay with that, and if so, we will send those out to you all. If you didn't see it, there's a table in the back corner that Mr. Van brought in a lot of his materials and archives that you can look at. That's there in the lobby. As I said, lunch will be at 12:30. I think I did not mention that we are not allowed to bring lunch into this room. So please take your lunch and go into one of the classrooms upstairs or into the community room. And it's actually pretty nice outside if you want to find a spot to perch outside. I put some signs up to help you navigate. So as I said, the accessibility will stay in this room. African American collecting will be in the community room, which is just off that main room where we were standing when we arrived. Community Archives is upstairs in the large classroom, and Reparative Descriptions is upstairs in the small classroom. I checked in with John. You can either take the elevator, which is out that door to the right, or you can go up the stairs, and the stairs are, you access the stairs through the community room. So if you're going to African American collecting, you go to the community room. If you want to go upstairs for the large or small classroom, you can take the elevator, or you can go through the community room and you'll see the stairs there. I tried to put some signage, but I'll be out there if anybody has any questions, and we will reconvene. Well, actually, we won't reconvene. There will be lunch at 12:30 in the community room, and then you're free to take your time for the next hour or so to debrief your sessions and catch up with each other. So, any questions? Okay, thank you all, and we'll see you later.